All right, so I guess I'm introducing Andy Ellis as our morning keynote. Andy and I met a long, long time ago. I find that security executives are either good at technology or at speaking business speak or at getting things done. And there are a handful of security executives in the industry that are triple threats. This is one of them. He's now my boss, so now people are going to think I had to say that. But I actually felt that way before I came to work for him. So when he knows how to get stuff done, that's the part you really want to listen to. So how do we actually make the big changes we need to make? I'm hoping you're going to find out in this Herding Lizards talk. There you go. Andy Ellis.
Whoa! Don't get that near my...
Shut off now.
Okay. Sorry about that. I've got apparently too many microphones. Good morning, everybody. I know it's a little bit early, although one of the things that I love about Source is that rather than scheduling morning keynotes at 8 a.m., which everybody will promptly either ignore or show up and sleep through, we let you all sleep off your hangovers from yesterday. I appreciate that. It also meant that those of us who are coming in from the outlying suburbs only have to come in rush hour instead of get up at ungodly hours to do things. So today I'm going to talk about herding lizards. Right? And people often talk about difficult tasks in business as herding cats. Right? How do you get a bunch of cats to come together? That seems like a really intractable problem, especially if all you've ever done is herd sheep. Ever try to get a bunch of cats to go in the same place? Laser pointer. Catnip works as well. Cats are very heavily motivated by toys and drugs. They're much like folks in business that way. Certainly some sales execs might meet that standard. Unfortunately, in the information security industry, we don't get that option, right? We don't often have toys to give to people, although sometimes we have a few. But what we do is we motivate by fear. We come in and we scare you, right? In fact, Rob started out this morning, right? What's the takeaway? Oh my God, doom and gloom, there's nothing we can do, the world is ending. Well, let me tell you something. That activates the lizard part of people's brain. Fight, flight, reflex. And people flee, right? They don't have to fight you, they run away. Although they can implement technologies and controls that will, help them protect themselves against you. I'll talk about a few of those. But that really is the problem. We're trying to herd lizards. If you'd like to herd lizards, it requires very careful paying attention to what things they're afraid of and motivating to move a little bit in the direction you might want them to. That's a really hard problem to do. Before we get started, I want to talk about a couple of different concepts. So the first one is the idea of the security poverty line. Wendy, are you awake and in the room yet? I didn't see Wendy yet. Oh. So Wendy Nather came up with this concept, and basically this is when you have so little money in your organization that you cannot meet even the perceived basic security needs. And that perception is important. Now Wendy actually was using this originally to talk about organizations that didn't even have enough money to meet their IT needs, let alone their security needs, right? That was just gravy. You don't bother putting an alarm system in your house if you don't yet have a house, sort of a concept. But we see this happen a lot. People who say, look, I just don't have enough money to get things done. I have this PCI checklist. That's my basic perception of what I have to do. I can't even do the things in it. So what do we do? What's the behavior that we see people do? So we call this the security subsistence syndrome. And this is simply, and something that we see in psychology a lot, when people can't meet their own basic needs, whatever they think those needs are, they have a very hard time planning for the future. And so all they're going to do every day is get up and focus on meeting a need. Right? And if they're paralyzed because they have one resource and 7 needs, sometimes they won't meet any need, because they'll try to divide that resource, their time up, to meeting 7 different problems, and they fail at doing any of those. And now when you're in business, and you're not actually worried about necessarily putting food on your table because you're getting salary, but instead you're worrying about how do I protect my company, and if it fails, it's not the end of the world, it's not like I had enough money, that paralysis is much more likely to happen. And so organizations, the thought process is, well, I can't even do enough to cover my ass, but if something happens, I don't want somebody to come over and say, well, why weren't you doing this, and why were you off attending a conference instead? Or why were you off doing this? The things that might get them better in the long run, they won't even go do. All they're going to do is activities that they can justify and defend before their standard of a reasonable person. Right? I will do the reasonable things that I would expect somebody to do in this instance. Now what this means is short-term thinking, so they're going to accrue technical debt. And when you accrue technical debt, basically every step you take forward, you cut a bunch of corners. Each of those corners that you have cut is work for you in the future. And now it's not real debt, we can't measure it, but we know these problems happen, right? You deploy the firewall and you don't bother doing all of the hardening to it. You at least change the password. But it turns out that you didn't take any of the software updates you probably should have. Or you didn't deny inbound traffic like maybe you should, or outbound traffic. I think Eric Coburn talked about that yesterday. Right? If you have a web server, why are you permitting it to make any connections outbound? All it should ever get is connections inbound. Right? That's some technical deficit that will show up later when your system gets compromised and is used as a bot to attack other systems. Or if you're running an open DNS resolver and you're not rate limiting traffic. Or you're a stub ISP and you're not implementing BCP 38. All of these are very simple things. These all cost you later, right? It's your bandwidth, it's your traffic, it's your reputation. It's a dangerous way to operate, but the reality is that this is how most organizations run. And it's not just a security problem, this is a business problem. Go talk to any product manager and ask them about all of the features that they're not releasing. Not the ones they're getting out in any given release. What are the things they're not releasing? And why did they pick those? Well, I kind of hope that nobody will notice we don't have that yet and I can get it into a future release. Right? I only have 5 developers to focus on this. So I'm trying to do what I see as the most critical thing right now. So these are our problems. These are sort of our terms. But let's look about how we, as security professionals, interact with the business. Right? How many folks here, when somebody in your business wants to do something of interest, not anything, but just something of interest, know or are required to come and talk to the InfoSec team to get approval in some fashion? Okay, good. A couple people, I think folks, nobody wanted to be the first one to raise their hand on that one. Right? And now we're told that's the holy grail, right? That if you're in security, then it should be that before somebody in the business goes and does something, they should come talk to you and say, can I do this? Is this safe? In fact, that's pretty much how the conversation starts. They come in and they say, is my project safe? Let's talk about that word safe for a minute. Safe is a really ugly word. It's actually better than secure, at least. But it's still an ugly word because what does it mean? We just found out that somebody got robbed around the corner from here. Is that safe? Or were they safe? Is this area safe? Rob thought that this is a safe neighborhood. Bad things can happen in it. Now, in general, it's a pretty safe neighborhood. But if I say the word safe, it evoked a different meaning to everybody here. The best example of this is when Caspar Weinberger became Secretary of Defense, one of the things he was asked was what the hardest part of his job was. He said, well, everybody thinks this should be easy, right? I have these military services that work for me and I just tell them to go do stuff and they will do it for me because they have to. They have to take my orders. The problem is if I give them orders, they don't always think the same thing I thought. So if I say, go secure a building, and if I give this order to the U.S. Marine Corps, the Marines will go in, kill every combatant in the building, and probably blow up the building for good measure. Because that's how Marines think. Now, if I tell the Army to secure a building, they're going to make sure they bring plenty of concertina wire and sandbags because they're going to think about defending the building, right? Ensure that any approach is covered by multiple fire lanes, that nobody can sneak up on the building, and that's how they're going to tend to operate. Now, if I tell the Navy to secure a building, they will make sure that the lights are all turned off and the doors are closed. Because that's what secure means for the Navy. And if I tell the Air Force to secure a building, they'll bring me back a 3-year lease with an option to buy. And so I have to be very careful about what words I use. So what does this word safe mean? Well, to us in our industry, what it means is here is a checklist of everything that as an industry we have ever seen go wrong. And these are specific controls that made sense to somebody about protecting against those risks. Have you implemented those controls? In fact, I love these. One of the things we get as a business, we're large cloud providers, people will send us their version of the checklist. Now you would think everybody would have standardized on ISO 27002 or on the BitSig. There's probably 5 or 6 different checklists that you could easily standardize on. What's fun is to go look at the bottom of the list. Because what happens is they start from ISO 27002, and then when they have a problem that no control in there would have protected against, they add a line at the bottom asking if you've implemented that control. Great information leakage. You have just told me all of the major incidents that have ever happened to you as a business. But the problem is, first of all, these are all designed for some historical artifact. It's like saying, wow, somebody was mugged around the building, around the corner. Have you implemented all of the controls that a 1900 city would have implemented to protect them? That makes absolutely no sense. We're in a different world today than we were in a week ago, let alone the years ago that these things were written. And of course, these are very complicated. So what does the business say back to us when they read it? They look at it and they say, my God, I don't understand half the words in here. It's also really long. I don't have a lot of time. And aren't you an expert in this? Can you fill this out for me? And so they give it back. And we say, oh, that's really great. Because if I fill it out for you, I can fill out on my timesheet how much time I spent supporting this project, and that will help me justify more budget next year because it costs me so much money to get every project out. So we fill it out, and we have to find problems. Of course, that's part of our job. So we'll say things like, you have this risk, which is you've chosen as a hashing function MD5, which is deprecated, and instead you should move to SHA-256, or maybe SHA-3 now. Poly 1305 might be a really great choice for you, and we'll put in something like this. Now, I'm hoping that this being a security conference, at least a quarter of the room understood each of those acronyms and whether I was full of shit or not when I said them. The business doesn't, right? Most folks look at them and say, I trust you to tell me what I should do or shouldn't do, and how big is this risk? And the reality is MD5 really a problem? And the answer is it depends. How are you choosing to use it? It might be a reasonable choice for speed in some places, might be a really horrific choice in other places. So they don't understand those esoteric risks, so they're going to turn it back on us. And they're going to say, well, you have a lot of risk in here and I have a hard time understanding it. Are any of these showstoppers? The moment somebody asks you that question, what should go off in your head is, I have just lost. Whatever the game was that we were playing, it's over. I lose. Because here's what your answer, your choice is. You can say, yes, this is a showstopper, or no. And if you say yes, they're going to look at you and say, wait, I have an opportunity to bring $50 million into the business over the next 3 years with this product launch. And if I don't get the product out today, our competitors are having one out next month, and they're going to steal a march on us. And you're going to hold that up because I chose an algorithm that everybody else is already using and you just wanted me to be the first one to migrate? That's crazy. I'm just going to go forward, and you clearly don't understand the business. Or you say, no, of course it's not a showstopper. You can go ahead. And what they hear is, I have no risk. And they go ahead. So in either way, you failed. In one way, you get ignored in the future, and in the other way, you get ignored right now. So that's our problem. And this is what we've taught people. That this is the conversation you want to have is right here. But we only tell people about the first two lines. We don't tell them where this will lead. This is a bad way to interact. So let's diverge for a minute and talk about what is value, right? You provided no value in that conversation. And I'll be honest, I was the guy on the right in that conversation a few years ago. I like that Josh says I'm somebody who gets things done. That's mostly because I have a lot of experience at not getting things done, so at least I know what not to do. So if we want to think about value, value is really simple. Value that you provide is the resources that you have times the capabilities with which you apply them. This is a build-up versus a look-down model. Companies are great at look-down models on this. I can tell you the value that a company has. I look at its revenue divided by how much money it's spending. That's its capabilities. Right? That's much harder in a team that's not a revenue generator, which security generally isn't. Resources is easy. That is your time and your money. Your CFO only thinks of this as money. They don't see that distinction. We often do, because we get people, but then we try to think about buying technologies. We think about people as our time, the technology that we acquire and spend money on is the money. Capabilities is the much more interesting thing. Capabilities is our skill, how well we do something. Let's say that I'm that aforementioned ISP and it's time to go implement BCP 38 and I have a CCIE on staff. Well, they have really high skill. So the amount of time that they have to spend implementing BCP 38 is probably about 3 minutes. And 2 minutes and 50 seconds of that was the QA to make sure they didn't just turn off the network. Now, if I pick a random person and say, please go implement BCP 38, it's going to take them more than 3 minutes to figure out what I just asked them to do. And then it's going to take them even longer to figure out how to implement that in the router. And so maybe they're going to spend much more time. Now I get the same value out of this, right? At the end of the day, I've implemented a control, it provides me some value. If I choose somebody with high skill, I need to spend less resources. If I choose somebody with low skill, I'm going to spend more resources. Then there's effort. When I first did this slide, somebody said to me, effort, you're implying that we're lazy slackers that don't want to work. And the answer is that wasn't my intention, but it's probably really true. You know, a lot of folks aren't going to work hard on something that they don't think is going to be effective. So you have to choose wisely what projects you give somebody, how much time you give them to do something. For those who are familiar with the concept of maker versus manager time, this is a really important concept. If I ask one of my security researchers to go investigate something, and then every half hour I come over and bother them, I should not expect that they can take these half-hour increments throughout the day. Maybe they have 8 of them through the day, so that's 4 hours they should have spent. I'm not going to expect them to have been spent 4 hours worth of effort, because the startup time for them to jump into a project, and then the interrupt time and the things that they lose. Whereas if they can get a 4-hour block where they can work on a project, write some software, do some research, do the readings, much, much better value out of that. Whereas managers, which I am, we operate on manager time, 15-minute increments. If I could have a meeting every 15 minutes throughout the day, that would be awesome. Unfortunately, startup and teardown costs for meetings is generally about 15 minutes. So we schedule them on 1-hour increments, even though we're only effective for 15 to 30 minutes in any given meeting. So the right thing as a manager to think about is say, well, how do I isolate my makers from this rapid-fire meeting set? Right? And if I go to a meeting, I can't come back and say, hey, Tim, go do this thing. Go to another meeting, come right back. Hey, Tim, go do this other thing. His effort is diminished. And that's no commentary on how lazy he is. We have separate commentaries about that. But then there's effectiveness. Let's say I give you a task. Go implement these firewall changes. And you spend however many hours it is to go prep it, and then we get to the end and we discover that we can't roll it out for whatever reason. And so we stop. Zero effectiveness. Now what's nice about this formula, or ugly about the formula, is if you drop effectiveness to 0, this is an organizational, environmental problem. Drop that to 0, you zero out value. You waste everything. If you pull somebody off of a project at the last minute and say, stop doing that, it doesn't matter how much effort they had, how much skill they had, or how much resources you threw at them. Well, it only matters in that you know now how much it cost you to not do something. Or if you run into problems later on dealing with other parts of the organization, and so your effectiveness is diminished, and you have to spend more resources to get back to the same value. So this is an important thing to keep in your head as you think about any project you would do. Do you have the right skill? Do you have the ability to apply the correct effort? And will you be ultimately effective? Absolutely. All of these slides are all pulled from talks I've given. These slides as a text will be up on my blog a little later today, csoandy.com. But today, right now, if you were there, you can look through some previous blog posts and pull out a bunch of these slides. So how do people think about security and security value ongoing? This is how the organization will perceive you. Right? They've invested in a security team. The security team has some money. And they believe that as time goes on, steady state, risk comes in from the bottom and you're producing value from the top, and risk is steady. Whether you think this is real or not, in fact, the Index of Cybersecurity, which I think Dan Geer started up, says that we as security professionals believe that the unmitigated risk is increasing over time. Businesses generally don't. That's what they pay you for. They pay you to ensure that you're continuing to increase your value so that the risks that are coming in get mitigated over time. Right? That's first perception mismatch. It's an important one for us to recognize that we don't see things the same way the rest of the business generally does. I like the car analogy because we do like to talk about how much security is good enough. It's like thinking how fast you need to be in a race. So let's profile what does good security look like. So let's hypothesize the existence of good security somewhere on a scale from N to M, completely non-scalar here. And some things we could look at is what's not good. Well, not good is if any casual adversary could pick up a couple of tools off of the internet and compromise your security. That seems like you're not good enough. You're insufficient against them. H.D. Moore's law is a serious problem here, which is the tools that you can pick up off of the internet get better every single day. And in fact, the capability of the casual adversary grows with Metasploit. Right? Metasploit gets better every day. In fact, I'd posit that somebody who can install apps, which sadly includes my 6-year-old children, can within 1 week be a better adversary than the median adversary was 10 years ago. Simply because the tools that they will have at their fingertips, plus the online resources available, will give them the sufficiency, so that's going to grow. Now, we think about the persistent adversaries, and we certainly wouldn't say, look, if you're doing good, reasonable security, you have to be so good that China can't breach you. Right? That seems like an unreasonable standard to hold anyone to. So now we've got at least boundaries defined from an adversary's capabilities. What about, and in fact, so above that would be perfect security. Everybody's heard the phrase, the perfect is the enemy of the good. Voltaire, it's actually, I think it was the best is the enemy of the better. And it basically says, if you aspire to be perfect and you refuse to step to good because it isn't perfect, you're doing something wrong. You should always like to be perfect. Take your first step towards good. Then we would look at where can good assessors help you? And this is an important distinction. I like to hire good assessors. Right? A good assessor is somebody who can come in, very quickly understand a complex system. That's a really hard level for them to achieve. And provide insight that I didn't already have about things I could do better. Now, sometimes that's because they have better tooling than what the casual adversary has. But this is what your goal is for an assessment, is somebody who can actually tell you what you're doing wrong. Now, most people don't hire assessors. Instead, they hire auditors. And auditors, you actually don't want them to be very good, because the job of an auditor is not to tell you what you're doing wrong. The job of an auditor is to tell the rest of the world that you're doing things right. So if you hire somebody that is good and capable at finding things you're doing wrong, you're going to have a serious problem, right? Their goals and your goals don't align. So companies tend to hire not very great auditors, but you can hire a serious auditor that with diligence applies themselves to at least ensuring that you are close to good security. But good security does not meet the checklist that they use, so they will always fall further and further behind. In fact, if you look at the PCI auditors, they're effectively now following a checklist that was realistically finalized 8-9 years ago. And even that wasn't seriously modified from when Visa had originally written the CISP 5 years prior to that. So they're checking, even seriously, against a 14-year-old standard. How many new technologies have come out in the last 14 years that are completely disruptive and that those controls don't align for? That's the gap between a serious auditor and being good. Now, the real answer is auditors work for the companies they're auditing, and that's who pays them. And those companies don't want to pay a lot of money. So what you often get is the standard auditor, and it's really more a game of, can you fool them? Can you tell them, right? They come in and they say, well, what are you doing for password management? Oh, of course, all of my passwords are at least this strong. Sure, show me one system where that's true. Oh, look, here's my model system for you. I've seen lots of companies that will do things like this. Now, if you play that game and you aim to fool the standard auditor, where you're going to end up is down here at the bottom. What does your organization think it can get away with? Right? And that's because, if I don't have a risk that hits me today, why am I putting any defenses against it? The number of banks that we talked to over the last few months has been very amusing. Banks who are getting hit by QCF, and so they're getting DOS attacks hitting them almost every day, and there are banks who aren't. And you go talk to the banks who aren't, and they say, well, I'm not getting attacked by them, why should I worry about this? And it doesn't matter that you can point out that the adversary will start at the biggest banks, and as they become failures at attacking those, they're moving down market. You say, well, they're moving down market in this fashion. I can tell you when the attack's going to hit you. Based on the rate at which they move down market, here's when you're going to be a target. They're not going to necessarily believe that because they think they can get away with this. And we'll wait until we get breached to invest money. Very common things people say. And the reality is, for many organizations, that's a perfectly reasonable approach. If you're a startup that is not profitable, you are dealing with the existential risk that you might not be in business tomorrow. Well, if I spent money on security yesterday, that not be in business tomorrow is instead not be in business today. right? All you do when you spend money on controls that turn out not to have hit you, right? Gambler's fallacy comes into play here. You don't know what will hit you. But look, I've rolled the dice, and it hasn't come up all zeros the last 80 days. Let's gamble that I got another 80 days before it's going to come up all zeros. So if we drew lines and sort of separated this group, we'd all like to be above that top line, right? That's sort of the lead head of the pack. The reality is people tend to be below that bottom line, right? That's the security poverty line. If you're thinking about fooling your auditors and you think, this didn't happen to me yet, so it isn't going to happen to me, then you're in a world of being in the poverty line. You're trapped by the subsistence syndrome. Not a fun place to be. Now, I drew this as a static. Here's what it might look like today. Put these cars onto a racetrack and see where they go. So some of them move faster than others. So as we're going forward, what we see is that the organizations that think they can get away with things are effectively doing nothing. They might as well be parked. It might even be safer for them to just pull off to the side of the road and admit that that's what you're doing and take some really big gambles. And unfortunately, the casual adversary is gaining on everybody. Right? It's not interesting, really, for most folks to talk about the advanced persistent adversary. Really, the casual adversary is what's going to get a lot of people in the end. Is the people who just decide today they don't like you because of something that one of your spokespeople said yesterday and can find a problem using easy tools, take you down, right? Even if you thought you were good, tomorrow that's not necessarily going to be enough for you. Now, why do people do this, right? Why do organizations think they can get away with things, right? And the reality is it somewhat comes down to the Peltzman effect, right? And for those of you who are not familiar with the Peltzman effect, Sam Peltzman was an economist at the University of Chicago, and we were having a national debate about whether we should have a seatbelt law. For those of you who are ancient enough, you'll remember learning to drive and the debate as to whether or not you needed to wear seatbelts. I think for everybody now that's a mandatory. But Sam Peltzman said, look, if you make people wear seatbelts, if you force them to wear seatbelts, they will kill more pedestrians. Killer seatbelts, right? And people laugh at this, but depending on whose studies you believe, Peltzman was really onto something. If you take risk away, people will go find more risk. There's been some great studies on NASCAR drivers. Best controlled study of driver modeled behavior. They drive on the exact same racetracks over and over every year, and they drive more and more recklessly every year. Why? They have better safety equipment. Why do you have brakes in a car? So that you can drive faster. Why do you have an airbag? So that you can drive faster. Why do you have a roll bar? So you can drive faster. And it turns out that there are fewer and fewer fatalities at NASCAR events, but more and more crashes. But they've designed good safety systems that mostly protect people. Now, there's one system that has been proposed that if you would like to have everybody drive safely, one security system put into every vehicle would cause people to drive very safe. If I put a 10-inch spike on your steering wheel, how many people in here would no longer even approach the speed limits? Right? I might not even get in my car anymore. I'll walk. And so this is a really interesting concept. This is the theory of risk compensation. What it really says is people have a steady state amount of risk that they're willing to tolerate. And when you take risk away from them, they go take more. When you give them risk, they get rid of some risk. It might not always be the same risk, right? It's not a very simple model. It's really about psychology. It's not about a statistical, I'm adding 5.8 risk points in, and now I'm going to go take out 5.8 risk points. It's a psychology of how people think about fear. There's only so much fear they're willing to tolerate, and then they're going to do things to get rid of that fear. Now, I've been cheating up until now. I've said the organization thinks. We don't have organizations that think yet. Right? So that's a nice shorthand when we say organization thinks, but the reality is, I jumped forward a little too fast, people think. Right? People are the ones that do the thinking in an organization. Now, people model their organization as something that thinks. And so what they do is they make decisions based on what they think the organization would consider to be important. That's always going to be informed by their own viewpoint, and that's very important. Now, let's look at what within an organization we consider risk. And since I just said organizations don't think, we should put this back to people. Now, there was this slide wandering through the industry a couple years ago that said, look, if you want to be able to talk to the business, the way to talk to the business is to put risk into their terms. So when you go talk to sales and you want to get them to worry about risk, then you should think about what are the security risks that matter to sales. Things like, oh, what if our contacts database gets stolen and somebody else now has access to that? Or if you want to talk to the lawyers, you should be talking about intellectual property rights, because that's what they care about. And if you want to talk to the product managers, then you should think about the security risks inherent in each one of their products. And the reality is that's not what they think risk is. I once had the pleasure of sitting next to the CIO of Bechtel, and he said, risk to me is anything that impacts schedule or budget. And he looks over at me and says, so that's you, right? Anything that makes him come in not on time or over budget, that was his risk. So when we think about lines of business, people who make products, what they worry about is, do they have a good P&L? Are they spending more money than they're making? If so, they have an issue. Are they going to gain sufficient market share against their competition? These are the risks to them. So they worry about time to market. They worry about cost to deliver features. They don't necessarily worry about, well, do I have a couple security bugs in my software? Because I'd rather have out buggy software than not have out good software. Right? That's the trade-off they're going to very easily make. And from their perspective, these are the risks that have a higher priority. We can go and look at our executives, look at our CEO, and the CEOs, or if you're a public company, they get to look at the quarterly numbers, and they're looking at profit. They're looking at what are my gross margins, what does my EPS look like? Do my margins remain constant from quarter to quarter? If most CEOs, that's one of the things that they're going to worry about. If you're bringing in a margin of 42%, is your operating margin, and that drops to 41%, that can be catastrophic for them. The street gives them a beating, so they want to hold it steady. They don't want it to get better. They want it to remain constant. Predictability is a worry they're going to have. We can go talk to our sales reps. They're very easy. They're motivated by money. Like if you ever said people aren't strictly motivated by money, you should go talk to somebody in sales. Generally, they have a quota. They would like to meet and exceed their quota. And so they worry about products that they can sell. A secure product that doesn't sell, they don't care about. A product that can sell, that has lots of bugs, they will go sell that. Look at the billion-dollar software companies, and you will see that this model has driven us to very buggy software in the world. What sells? Right? What can you get out to market and sell to people? When we go talk to our CFOs, they do worry about resource allocation. Right? They're going to care about whether you do have resources in the right place to do things, whether the budgets that people have forecast are accurate. Right? That's their risk model is, am I going to be surprised because you all of a sudden spent more money than you'd promised to, or you were unable to spend your money? Our employees, they tend to be pretty simple. They worry about whether or not they have a job. Right? Are you making decisions that will risk their job? By the way, if you're in that category, you're worried about whether you have a job, we're hiring. Shameless plug. And lastly, security comes in and we say, well, is this safe? Now, what's interesting is all of the other risks that people have are very concrete. Like you can really say, am I going to make my quota, yes or no? Right? Is this a good allocation of resources? You can always look back and answer whether or not yes or no is the correct answer. Safe? That's a really hard one. We're hedging ourselves. We're hedging our bets and saying, well, I'll let you know if it's safe based on whether or not we get breached. So the reality is I've again caricatured everybody here. So we're really again talking about the lizards. What are the parts motivated by fear? Part of our job is to get out of that. And how do we get people to be motivated by success, by joy, by rewards, by achievements? Right? That's how you convert people from being lizards. But before we do that, let's look at how the set point theory that I talked about really does apply and change our motivations and the way that we operate. So on the left, my axis is perceived risk. Now, none of us are good judges of all the risk that is out there. So we create this model of the risk that we perceive, and then applying against it is the security value that we might have that. So the neighborhood I live in, I lock my doors before I leave my house. I used to live up in a beautiful community in Vermont where why would you lock your doors? Your neighbors might need something. Right? But I had different risks, and so you applied a different amount of security value to cancel out the risk. And so as businesses go along, you introduce new risks, it does happen. So you find about a risk and say, here is this new risk. And so now the amount of perceived risk I have has gone up. So what we should believe will happen is that people will react to that. Say, there's a 0-day vulnerability in bind out, so let's patch bind. And we drive risk back to where we thought it was, and then we move on. And that really simply is how the set point theory should operate, how people should be able to behave with risk. Introduce a new risk, take an action to push it back down. We want to have a stable equilibrium. That's what people's brains need. Now, most of the time, we don't get this. But this is what we want to have. So most of the time, we're in some other fantasy world in which as risks come in, somebody tells us about them, and we say, oh my God, that's a really, really scary risk. And so I should react, and I should do something about it. So we do something about it, and then we look at what we have done, and we realize that we still have unmitigated risk. This is a problem. And now we ourselves create this because we will blow risk out of proportion. Oh my God, if this doesn't happen, then we'll be out of business and millions of people will die. Or the internet will collapse, or whatever it's going to be, right? So we scare people with how big something is. They take an action to mitigate it that they thought would have mitigated it, and it doesn't. Notice these two lines aren't lined up. We have a problem. The human brain needs them to line up. So we have some options. There's one option. By the way, I said this, the perceived risk, and now we're thinking about actual risk. So we're going to tell ourselves a story about actual risk. We're going to say, well, I was wrong about the risk that I perceived. So clearly, actual risk is something different, so let me work inside that framework. Unfortunately, it's like a Matryoshka doll. Just because you've taken off one layer doesn't mean there aren't more layers inside here. So we think about actual risk. We say, well, what if my actual risk was always up this high? And when I was told about this risk, it wasn't quite as scary as I thought it was, but it was still a little bit scary. And the action that I took completely nullified that additional risk. And then now I get to move along, and the amount of risk I have is constant. This would actually be much healthier than what people do. Because this is hard because now you have to retcon yourself into a world where you used to think there was more risk than you actually thought there was. But cognitive dissonance is something that humans are really good at dealing with. So some people do this. What other people do is they tell themselves a different story. They say, well, I was going along and I knew what the actual risk was. Probably the first problem there. And then you came along and told risk. And in fact, there's a whole bunch of risks that you've been telling me about, Chicken Little. And why should I take those risks at face value? Any of them, right? You're not a trustworthy actor. You tell me about scary things. You're the boy who cried wolf. So I'm going to take all of those out of my equation too. And so all of this risk that over time you have told me about, I'm going to get rid of. It doesn't matter to me. And the joy of this one is now I get to go on and wait, but now I'm back in another world where the amount of risk that I currently have and the risk that I used to have aren't the same. How do I fix that? Well, I could tell myself a story that I've never been this risky, but that seems like it's not a lot of fun. Instead, what I can do is say, here's how much risk I should be taking. I'm clearly not taking it. Let's go take some more. Right? And so we'll often see people, when they're confronted over and over again, they're scared, and people throw FUD at them and say, you should worry about this and you should worry about that. They actually start taking more risk, not less. FUD desensitizes them to the risk that they ought to worry about. Right? If somebody is telling you that the world will end tomorrow if you don't give them some money, and the world didn't end tomorrow, well, maybe world ending isn't such a big problem after all. And so your business ending is also not a very big problem. And so these are ways that people will operate, and this is how they will react when we try to scare them. It's very hard to scare people who are already living in a scary world. So how do we train them? So let's talk about training lizards. Now let's hypothesize that actual risk is greater than perceived risk. At least we like to think so. If it wasn't that case, most of us wouldn't have jobs. So we say, well, there's this actual risk that the business doesn't really know about. And so what we can do is we can train them. We can take advantage of set point theory, and we can take this risk, and it has to be an actionable risk, not fear, something that's actually there, and say, here's this risk, let me tell you about it. And so now the business perceives the risk. Somebody says, okay, so I have this risk, it just came in, well, what do I do? There's an obvious action that I can go take. And so I take that obvious action, And that obvious action reduces my risk. And so now they're back to where they thought they were, have the same amount of perceived risk. But what you've done is you've taken an ignored risk out of the system. Right? I took an ignored risk, I told you about it, you fixed it, and you're happy, right? This is exactly how their brain wants to operate. Here's a risk, I dealt with it, I move on. Well, you can game the system for a little while, wait a little bit, tell them about another risk. Again, actionable risks only. If you give them risks that they can't act on, this terrifies them, right? They get locked up. And you can keep doing this, right? This is like muscle memory, right? If people keep solving problems, A, they get a nice rush out. There's a great adrenaline rush in making an achievement. But they get to practice. Oh, wait, once a month, I have to patch my Windows systems. Anybody remember before Patch Tuesday, getting people to patch Windows systems was almost impossible. Then we said, look, once a month, this is what you're going to do. Now, the reality is those vulnerabilities were already there. Those risks were already there. What we did was we gave people a regular, steady state action to take that let them believe they were here. And over time, they started to realize things like, wow, I have to maintain all of my Windows devices at the same patch level, and that will make my life much easier. So we saw better standardization in organizations. Right? One of the best things Microsoft has ever done for the industry is Patch Tuesday. Now, the challenge is we have perceived risk, we have actual risk. Again, not really actual risk, but let's assume we knew what actual risk was. And what would be nice is if we could live on this dashed line where wherever our actual risk was, we were at that same point on perceived risk. So to make my graphic work, I'm going to assume we start out there. And now there's a bunch of different things we can do, and it's important for us to understand how those affect perceived and actual risk. So one thing that can happen is we can ignore the state of the world. And when a threat comes in, new vulnerability impacts us, new adversary decides to target our industry, we can just ignore it. So our risk increases and we pretend it doesn't. So we think we're happy, we don't have to do anything, but our actual risk model has changed. Probably not a good place to be. Slightly better, actually much better than that, is we know about these risks. We know about these vulnerabilities, and we're paying attention, so if something new comes in, we at least believe we're riskier. The downside of this actually does have a downside, is that new risks are often not actionable. Right? So what you have to be able to do is give them some different action to take that will at least make them feel a little bit safer across the board, unless there's an action that directly modifies that problem. Now, when we go talk to most of our security vendors, what we get instead is FUD. Right? Oh my God, here's this risk where so-and-so had a data breach. And people say, well, does that really even apply to me? Right? Why are you trying to tell me about this attack from one nation state to another nation state? How many people remember all the vendors who are out marketing Stuxnet defenses? Right? When Stuxnet came, a couple of people were really excited to bring that one up, right? And everybody said, every business looked at that who wasn't in the energy sector. If you're in the energy sector, maybe you did actually care. But everybody else said, wait, Stuxnet was the U.S. deciding to take out the Iranian nuclear facilities. I'm not the U.S., and I'm not Iran, and I'm not running a nuclear facility. Why should I care? Right? So it was an attempt to drive up perceived risk without actually pushing actual risk. Now we can move in the other direction. This is actually one of my favorite things, is stealth improvements. We occasionally run into this. We maintain a database of bunches of vulnerabilities and risks that our team is aware of and has been aware of for sometimes many, many years. And occasionally when you go touch base, you say, hey, here's this problem. We would love it if you could go fix it. The people in that organization will be like, what are you talking about? That got fixed like 3 years ago. And we're like, great, we've been carrying around this risk that we thought affected the company. And it turns out you fixed that for us. Thank you very much. And then we'll go off and we'll curse you later for not telling us when it happened. Maybe we would have made different decisions. These are great, but the problem is if too many of these rack up, then people start to think that what you're doing is sowing FUD. Right? Because notice that these took you in the same direction off of the axis. You now have more perceived risk than actual risk. You can do same things, risk reduction. Right? Here's a problem, we fixed it, we tell everybody we fixed it, we move on. Right? Staying on that axis, very good thing. And last thing that we can do is we can invest in security theater. Right? We can do things that make us absolutely no safer, but make us feel like we might be a little bit safer. I think we all know of, certain agencies that pretty much do mostly security theater. Now I left out, the interesting axis. How can you move directly away from this axis? And there are sort of two interesting things. And the first one is blind compliance. Right? We talked about the PCI checklist, a 14-year-old checklist. You can just go implement PCI. It's not that hard. And it's a lot of work. But if you blindly just do the things that it says to do, many of those things might make you riskier. For instance, one of my favorite ones, and I have this battle with an auditor, every time we bring in a new auditor, we have to argue about the password complexity requirements and password aging. Because we don't use passwords in the systems that are in scope for that. It's all done through identities, right? Everything is an RSA identity. And so we say, well, we're using asymmetric crypto that has none of the attack vectors against passwords. And we have, in fact, once had an auditor suggest that maybe we should just implement passwords so that we could implement the controls on passwords. And I wondered, and I'm like, have you ever talked to somebody who did that? Because if so, they have made themselves immeasurably worse, but they think they're safe because there's this whole section of the standard that they don't have to argue with you over. My favorite example of this was a sign that I saw when I was in the UK. I was staying at a hotel, and in the shower, there was a little sign, clearly mass made, so it was probably in every shower in this chain, that said, for your comfort and safety, before you shower, please ensure the bath mat is securely in place and the shower curtain is inside the bath. And so you're thinking, wow, one of their lawyers must have thought about the liability of somebody slipping in the bathtub, and so they mandated they put this up to train everybody on what they should do in case so they wouldn't slip in the bathtub, right? Seems like a really sensible action, right? To just comply with that across the whole company, across the whole hotel chain. You would think this makes everything, reduces the risk. Certainly for the company, right? They've now told me what I should do. Do you know what wasn't in that hotel room anywhere? A bath mat or a shower curtain. So from my perspective, I'm assuming this came out from their lawyers. So their lawyers had said, well, we might have a negligence problem because if we don't tell people to do this and they slip and fall, they can blame us. And for those of you who are familiar with various forms of liability, they just move from negligence to recklessness. Because negligence is about an unknowing risk creation, and recklessness is a knowing one. And I know that they are very aware of the risks of not having those things in a bathroom. So they've increased their risk while believing they decreased their risk. Now on the bright side, what they did for me was the exact opposite. Right? Was they made me aware of a risk, that this was a slippery bathtub. And even though they didn't give me the right tools to implement it, I could be a little more safe in that bathtub. I could ensure my feet were well planted. And trust me, I was very nervous. I'm like, how many people have slipped and fallen in these bathtubs as I'm taking my shower? And so you see this, right? Good awareness, right, doesn't actually change at first your risk environment. It's not like you became aware of a risk and the risk got worse, right? Somebody was robbed around the corner. I'm going to keep coming back to this one because it's very timely. I apologize. Whoever it was, I'm very sorry. Our city is normally much more awesome than that, but not all the time. Somebody was robbed around the corner. Now, when you walked in today, you didn't know about this, right? The risk was still present. You could be robbed tonight. So you had the risk. You became aware of the risk. How many people feel slightly less safe because they're aware of that risk? Come on, you guys got to be honest, right? I'll be honest. I immediately, my first thought was, wow, I need to be a little more careful as I walk around out there. I'll assume the rest of you are not on caffeine. So I'm now more aware of that risk. Now, my second thought was, okay, well, I'll make sure that I don't go walk down a blind alley, or I'll walk with somebody, or maybe I'll walk with somebody who looks like they might need somebody walking with them. And so I'm going to take an action. That action will make me safer. But do I feel safer than I did before I walked into the room? And the answer is no. Right? I still have this leave behind of I'm aware of the risk, I took an action to reduce it. So net, from when I walked into the room until now, I'm safer, but I feel less safe. Most good awareness activities cause this relationship. Right? You leave people with a little bit of extra risk because they're aware of the snare, they were able to deal with it. So where they went was less actual risk, more perceived risk. They got to do something, which makes them feel good, and so they'll go do something else as well. They'll reduce risk a little bit more. So maybe they'll say, well, I'm going to do 2 or 3 different things to help mitigate against these risks. This is a great place to be. It's why I'm a huge fan of awareness as a great security control. I could spend lots of time ranting about bad awareness, but this is the idea for good awareness. So let's go back and think about it. So we just talked about that residual risk you have that causes you to change your behavior the next time. And that's really important if you want to be in a company for a long time, is think about how do people do an iterated game of choosing what risks they will take and which ones they will deal with. You are not going to win every day. In fact, you don't want to win every day. What you want to do is ensure that tomorrow they make a better decision because of an interaction today. So how do they think about tomorrows? Business owners who are trying to launch a product are worrying about whether they succeeded in getting better market share, right? And so they might take more risks if they're not doing well at that, or they might take less risk if they are doing well at that, right? That's something you have to think about, is how is their risk profile changing over time? Our CEOs might be worried about the balance between business lines, right? We have 4 different business units. A couple of them are really low risk, and a couple of them are really high risk. If one of the low risk ones wants to become high risk, and they say, well, they're high risk, can't I take high risk decisions too? The answer is kind of like, no, we have a blended risk portfolio. You guys play it safe. This is where the risky investment goes. That's how CEOs will tend to operate. Sales reps worry about whether or not the thing that you told them to sell succeeded. And if you come back and say, well, here's my next version, they say, well, I couldn't sell your last version. Right, they're going to be more averse to believing you about the sellability of this product. Our CFOs really worry about budget accuracy. So if you say, look, I need $1 million next year, and you only spend $500,000, how many people at first blush think that's great, right? I told the CFO I was going to spend $1 million, and I only spent $500,000. I saved the company $500,000. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Great! Everybody figured that one out quickly. That's a bad thing. The CFO isn't about saving money, it's about accuracy. Right? If you say you're going to spend $1 million, you damn well better spend $1 million. Because if you didn't, then that was $500,000 that somebody else could have spent. And instead we're stuck with it in our bank account, and that looks bad. We're not making wise choices with our money. The street doesn't like it. Our forecast gets thrown off for what we thought our cost of goods was going to be. Lots of bad things come out of this one. Now our employees say, well, I can look at the profitability just like the rest of you, and I know where the printer is and how to use Word or LaTeX, and I'll go update my resume. If you know how to write yours in tech or LaTeX, we really want to talk to you. Sorry, I'm going to do a bunch of shameless plugs there. I got too many openings to go fill. And in security, what do? We iterate. We say, well, let's just write down another control. You screwed up this way. I'll add another control to my checklist so I make sure the next person doesn't do that without having been told. Functionally, this is us doing security subsistence syndrome. We can't affect the business, so what we're going to keep doing is things that cover our ass. So we're going to keep extending our checklist. The checklist doesn't make us safer, but it lets us say, well, if there was a breach, I told you so. And it might feel really nice to say, well, I told you so, but it doesn't actually make your business any more safe. So how do we have better conversations? How do we talk to the business in a sane way? So we start out that same thing. The business comes to us and says, here's my project. Is it safe? Now this is the fun answer, and you can ask anybody in my adversarial resilience team how their first conversation went when they went and talked to somebody, or on our safety team. I've got folks from both teams here. And the answer is, I don't know. Is it safe? You tell me. Because I don't know what your system is. Right? First piece of humility. We do not know the systems as well as their designers. Now, there will be times when that's not true, when you do actually know it better than the current designer, but you don't admit that. I don't know, is it safe? Because this isn't actually about understanding safety. This is about making the business owner understand safety. And the first time you say this to somebody, their response will be a little bit flabbergasted. Isn't that what you're paid for? Isn't it your job to tell me if what I'm doing is safe? And the answer is no. Our job is to help you think about safety. Right? We will engage with you. We will partner with you. Let us teach you about thinking about safety. Right? Here's the way that other people have thought about safety. Now, do you think your product is safe? Give me an argument for the safety of your product. But you're really trying to convince yourself, not me. I'm just here to help you. Right? I'm like Jiminy Cricket sitting on your shoulder. This will sometimes take a few iterations, but then they'll often come back with safety considerations. Here's my assessment of the risks to my business. Because you've told me to think about things like, what are my customer security goals? What are the assumptions that I have? What environment am I operating in? What are the adversaries today, and how do I expect them to evolve? What is the profit motive for each of those actors? I think this is a reasonably safe thing for me to do, right? And now they might be wrong, but that's okay, right? They might be taking more risk than you think is okay. But the real goal here is to say, great, now that you're aware of these risks and you have written them down and you have internalized them, are you planning on fixing any of them next time? That's our goal, right? Can we get them to improve from one iteration to the next? Because by the time they bring something to you, it probably is too late for them already to approve, to change them. Now the reality is sometimes people will come back and they're grossly wrong on their assessment of risks. You need to have a way to deal with those. Our way is we ask their boss. Please go make an argument to your boss about the reasonableness here until we get that to a level that we think the person making the decision truly understands and is making a reasonable business decision. So how do we get there? Right, that's the goal. We'd love to be in this model. How do we get better, especially if we're trapped in an organization that says, here are a lot of things to do. How many people in here are jugglers but not professional jugglers? At least give me a couple. Good. A lot of folks seem to take this up. So if I hand you 3 balls and say, please juggle these 3 balls, how successful do you think you can be? Pretty successful? Nods ahead. If you claim to be a juggler who's not a professional one, I hope you can juggle 3 balls. And so we could think of this as, in our job, maybe there's a couple of obvious things. We have to protect workstations, we have to protect data at rest, and we have to deal with transmission security. That's what everybody tells us. Those are the things we have to deal with. Now, if I hand you a couple of more balls and say, well, here's 5 things to go juggle, most of the people who are non-professional jugglers probably say, well, I cannot be at all successful juggling 5 balls, because I will take 5 balls, and I don't even know how to get started, and I end up with 5 balls on the floor. And so we add in adversaries that are coming in and, reporting. We should report on how good we're doing at juggling all of our balls. Now, the reality is this is more of our job, right? 17 balls to juggle. If I hand you 17 balls and ask you to juggle them, how successful can you be? Now, the real answer is if you're at all clever, you will look at 17 balls. They don't even fit in your hand. You put 14 of them down, bring back 3 and start juggling them. Say, well, I've juggled these 3 balls for a little while. Now let me get 3 more and I'll juggle those. And that's what we have to do in our jobs. If you have 17 things that you should have to think about, internationalization, innovation, saving money, all of these problems, pick 3 that you're going to be successful at and do them. Right? If you're going to fail at 17, at least pick the 14 that you will fail at and go do 3 others. And maybe the 3 that you pick, maybe the ones that are most important to you, are the automation that will take one of these balls away entirely. Maybe it's the innovation to bring in something new that will juggle some balls for you. Maybe it's training. Maybe there is that one critical thing you can't get rid of even though it's not providing a lot of value. Right? And the easy thing to do is say, look, my capabilities are my skill, my effort, and my effectiveness. I should only do things that increase one of those 3 things. Right? If you cannot increase those, it's probably not worth doing. Right? It might still be something you have to do, but that should be your rubric for whether or not you want to do something. Right? Drop things on the floor. I like to encourage this in my staff, mostly by walking by and giving them lots of balls to juggle and telling them explicitly, here's an idea. You decide if you want to do it. You decide if you can get it done efficiently and if it will make you more effective tomorrow or give you higher skill tomorrow. Right? Conferences where you can actually learn is a great way to do this. There's my plug for Source. Now, this is not something that is easy and quantifiable and you can drop it into numbers. How many folks here love calculating return on security investment? Good. I have nobody I have to go debunk in the room, although I'm sure I will have several of them on Twitter yelling at me shortly. So unless you're in fraud or directly in insurance, in an actuarial world where a risk has a financial consequence and happens to you multiple times a day, if you're in that world, return on security investment is actually a great discipline. Right? So I have a fraud system, I have a fraud problem, I will implement 2 fraud systems side by side, I will do A/B testing, and I know which one is going to give me better bang for the buck. Right? That's an easy problem. Easy, Ali over there is laughing at me for calling that one easy. But the reality is we often deal with this thing, annualized loss expectancy, the biggest joke in the CBK, which says, oh look, I have this thing that might happen, cost me $5 million, and I think it'll happen 10% of the times in any given year. So once every 10 years, I expect to have this happen to me. So my annualized loss expectancy, I can pull out Excel and I can put these two numbers in, and I can find out that that's $500,000 a year. Right? That's what this is going to cost me, whatever this risk is. And this is sort of how simple we like to claim, and vendors do this. Then we come in and say, look, I'll sell you this service, $50,000, $14,000 a year maintenance, and it should reduce the number of events that will happen by 10%. Well, I can take my handy dandy calculator back in, the magic of Excel, I can multiply these numbers together. I can say, $26,000 a year is what I'm going to effectively pay for this system. And you're going to save me $50,000 a year with this system. Right? Well, that seems like a great deal. This is return on security investment. Don't do it. Because I can very easily say, take this 5 million and the 10%, change those to 5 billion and 0.01% and justify the exact same spend. Right? This is oftentimes value is about a gut feel. Right? What are you actually going to feel like you can spend your time and money on and get better at? Right? I wouldn't worry about the justification. It's the internalized knowledge. Can I invest in this and will I tomorrow be better? And will the business think I'm better? So before Jack gives me the quick hook, your takeaway here, improve security value. Right? Value is easy. We want to improve that. So your delta V over dVdt should be greater than 0. What oftentimes we think about or are told to think about is how do I get more money from the CFO? Right? How do I justify spending money so I get more resources over time? I wouldn't recommend trying that. The real answer is how do you increase your capabilities over time? How do you create surplus so that you can do more with the same? And what will happen is if you succeed at this, if you can increase your capabilities so that you're more effective, the business will bring money to your door. Right? You don't have to go ask for money. People will show up and ask you to do things for them, and they will bring a checkbook with them and say, you're clearly effective at doing things. Please do something for me. So thank you very much. If you want to tell me how wrong I am, that's where I am on Twitter. If you want to tell me how right I am, you can do that there as well. If you'd like a job, there's my email address, or come find anybody at this table right here. Thank you all very much.